On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
And I want to stand in the halls, of social justice and civil rights and, activists, of our time, before and beyond, as an independent, powerful member of that narrative. I want to go down in history as one of the ones who stood up, who did what he could with what he had, consistently showed up.
Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. is a photojournalist and image activist. He has taken photographs on the front lines of America's social justice movements, documenting people and events in cities throughout the nation. His social documentary work has been featured at the Levine Museum of the New South and the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture. His work includes professional sports, portrait, editorial, and fashion photography. He has taken photographs for the NFL, NBA, and NASCAR, and commissioned to take concert photography at multiple record-breaking dates of Jay-Z's 444 tour. He is a recipient of Charlotte Magazine's 2018 Charlottean of the Year Award. In this episode, we explore image activism, the Brook Hill neighborhood of Charlotte, growing up in Rockford, Illinois, and producing work for the halls of social justice. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Alvin, welcome.
Thank you.
How do you describe your work?
Image activism. I describe it as a lens of the people. The average everyday individual was given an opportunity to be in multiple places at multiple times with an opportunity to have a say-so in the complete narrative. It would be image activism, in my opinion. And it really doesn't have anything to do with a particular genre, so to speak, of art. It's the camera in all places at all times from the lens of the people.
When you think of an activist, you think of a cause. What do you mean by image activism?
As a professional photographer, I don't necessarily have a critical analysis for each particular moment in time. I may or may not have a vested interest in a particular movement, but as a professional photographer, as a documentarian, I'm available. And everything we know about civil rights, everything we know about the fight for freedom and historical references is relayed to us via a photograph, a video, text, or some sort of audible moment in time. And if I'm the cameraman, if I'm the guy that just happens to be on the ground, it's my responsibility, regardless of my affiliations with, media outlets. If I'm there, I have to do my job. It's almost, you as a writer, you don't have to write on everything, but if you're there, you have an opportunity to craft a narrative. And as an image activist, it's almost as if I asked myself what type of man I would have been in the 60s. How would I show up? If I were 40 years old in 1965, what would I be doing? 44 years old in 1950, 1970, what would I be doing? 44 in 2019, and I'm an artist. I'm a photographer. I would draw it if I could. I would write about it if I could. I would dance about it. I would create something, and photography just happens to be it. So the image activism aspect of it is crafting the narrative from the perspective of the people, because I do have an opinion. I was asked one time, how do you remain neutral? And I can't. I absolutely cannot. I have to pick a side. I have to choose a side, even if it's just the truth. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most heavily opinionated answer, but I have to have a clear boundary with what's going on or it's going to adversely affect the imagery.
Your photos express an opinion. Does that make it different than news photography?
Yes. It absolutely does. Oftentimes, as a photojournalist, you're told what to capture. You're told what narrative to create, even if it's not there. Perspective is everything. You'll see certain events that are made larger than life because it sells newspapers. It creates clicks and interest. As an independent, I don't and haven't sold my images. I do this work because I feel I have to. So the incentive is to create the most powerful body of work that reflects the moment. It doesn't matter if it's ugly, it doesn't matter if it's pretty, it doesn't matter if it's violent. It is what it is. I don't add to it, I don't take away. I have a critical analysis behind it. I kind of grow to understand what it is, whether it's the Fight for 15 or Water and Standing Rock, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's, House Bill 2. I've been present in all of those scenes, and on the ground and just a multitude of events. And just because it doesn't affect me directly doesn't mean that not only do I have a right to be there, but a responsibility to the people to capture the story.
Alvin, your social documentary photographs are shot in black and white. Why?
Sometimes. Every time I've documented, whether it's a commercial event or sports or anything, it's always in color. I don't capture anything in black and white initially. I capture it in color so I can maintain all of the information from the image. And if it calls for black and white, then I'll do exactly that. I edit or process every image individually. I don't batch edit anything. Every single image is edited individually by hand. Now, there aren't buttons that are clicked. It's an actual process as if it was film. And that's how I capture images. Traditionally, in 36 exposures at a time, even if it's digital or it's mirrorless, I keep a clock in my mind. Okay, 36 exposures, it's time to reload. It's time to get some new film, pause. And you just don't fire off when you have film because you don't have an unlimited database. You got to come on with it or you're going to run out of film. So I try to get what I need to get early. I try to create as intentional as I can and try to do as much as I can in camera. I personally know how to develop film. And that's something that I felt was important to really understand the craft. I didn't necessarily want to be in a hurry, or everything to be done on a computer. I wanted to understand the process and the chemicals and the time involved. So when I'm creating an image in this field, if I'm shooting with film in mind, I'm not in a hurry. I've learned to slow down. And that's why the images are intentional. There's feeling, there's emotion, there's purpose in images that if shot in bursts, I would lose quality and clarity, at least in my mind.
Alvin, I'd like to turn to two exhibits of yours.
Mm-hmm.
No Justice, No Peace at the Levine Museum of the New South. What is that exhibit about?
It is about a rapid response to officer-involved shootings throughout the United States of America. We decided that Charlotte was to be the first in the long list of conversations about officer-involved shootings. And it was the first. The response was amazing, and it was quick, and it was put together so well with many community partners. The Levine just put it all on the line when that exhibition was opened. There was a lot of backlash. There was a lot of concern, a lot of fear, a lot of frustration, but a lot of power was manifested because it allowed a conversation among the community and then a series of communications and conversations among the community through all aspects of our community. You could have been an officer, you could have been a teacher, you could have been a student, an employee, an employer, an athlete, anyone, and be able to hold a safe space at the Levine, during the series of programming. But images, video, artifacts, history, historical facts. It wasn't just pictures. It wasn't just opinions. There had to be time spent and research made, ideas created, or it just come from a perspective of there are roughly over 1,000 people every single year who become victims of officer-involved shootings in America every year. Where do you lie context with that? Where does this come from? Why in 2016 that Charlotte, North Carolina was one of only a few cities in America where the police only killed black people. And this is an ongoing epidemic in a country where you're guilty until you're proved innocent in many cases. This was a community response. It was an institution that decided to build with community partners and release resources into a project where we could talk. And after that particular instance where Keith Lamont Scott was killed, a lot of people were angry. A lot of people were frustrated. They were afraid. And there was no centralized community effort to where people could talk. I literally stood there and people didn't know who I was. And I watched people cry. I've heard people talk to each other about personal events. And sometimes I reveal who I am and sometimes I just listen. But just to see that transformation throughout a community over 2 years has been amazing. And the Levine has been a benchmark in change for decades. This didn't just start happening. This has been going on for a while. And what a lot of people know about Charlotte is through the Levine. What a lot of people know about history here and, a lot of the artifacts that have been preserved has been through, the Levine. So that was a very, very, very proud moment in my career.
What work do you have displayed at the exhibit?
I didn't realize until a couple of days ago that I've been doing this work since approximately 2008. I thought it was right after Trayvon Martin. No, a few years before. And with that wealth of images, I decided that at the very least for the past 7 years that I wanted to compile and construct and curate a cohesive body of work from Ferguson and Flint and Standing Rock and Charlottesville and Chicago and Asheville and Brooklyn and many of the areas and communities that I've photographed and documented social injustice, whether it was protests, whether it was marches, whether it was just community events. And those images were compiled and archived and created and curated and placed into No Justice, No Peace. So you're not just seeing Charlotte. You're seeing, again, Chicago, Standing Rock, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., just throughout the country. And I can't remember exactly how many images were present, 30 maybe, 40 something throughout. But there was kind of a timeline of sorts. This started here, this started here, just started here. It was kind of just a circular timeline of activities, just how things have changed, but how they remain the same. If it wasn't for what many individuals were wearing, you wouldn't know what year if the photos were in black and white, because we're going through some of the same struggles. When I first saw it, you're like, okay, well, it's going to be this part. No, it's that part, and it's that part, and it's that part, and it's that part, and it's that part. It's throughout the exhibition, along with the partnership with JCSU University, which was an amazing component. Dr. Tiffany Packer just knocked it out the park. Her and her students just rocked it out. Dr. Brenda Tyndall was the historian. I'm in there crying, just looking at the facts. From 1965, I think it was less than 5% of students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools attended integrated schools. Like, what are we talking about? And then we wonder how we got here. So that was an absolutely important historical component. And just partnerships with, CMPD and our community partners, Bank of America, really was just like, look, what do you guys need? And that doesn't happen often enough. So when you have autonomy to create a platform, on behalf of the people, it can be beautiful. And I think it was.
Alvin, when things are happening on the street and you have a camera in your hand, what goes through your mind?
Safety. Absolute safety. At times, and depending on which lens, which focal length I'm using, what I'm carrying could be mistaken as an actual weapon, which it is. A camera is absolutely a weapon. But I have to maintain safety. I have to be careful where I'm waving that thing around. If I'm in a community where I'm unfamiliar, I don't really have contact people on the ground. I'm just some dude walking around, with $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, worth of equipment. It's not just the street so much as law enforcement. There are individuals that are just present who mean absolutely no one, any good. So it's protecting myself, protecting my equipment, protecting the images, getting home safe more than anything. It isn't just if you're law enforcement, you have to worry about protesters, or you're protesters, you have to worry about law enforcement. Like if you're holding a camera, you have to worry about everybody. You don't know who's coming for you. You don't know what individuals have on their mind. You don't know who you appear to be to them. I don't have press credentials when I'm out in the field. I'm not sent through any of these larger media outlets that have security and what have you. I'm just out there to capture the truth. So what goes through my head is absolute safety. What goes through my head is maintaining the integrity of the images and trying not to implicate anyone for exercising their rights. You won't see images captured by me of anyone breaking the law. If there's damage done, if there's, anything like that, I don't even capture those images. That's not why I'm there. If there's 500 of us outside and one person breaks a window, I'm not going to implicate 499 people. How important that particular act is or is not, I have no interest in that. I want to understand and know why 499 people are still here. So that's where my lens is trained. Everyone else exercising their rights as Americans. I don't care about the violence. I don't care about the violence and the porn that has, everyone so riled up. I remember the fire from the uprising in Charlotte might have been a foot high. I mean, that thing was so small. And I saw some of the images that looked like it was an inferno because of the perspective. Oh man, they're setting fire to stuff. Oh, there was one small fire that could have been doused with a bucket of water, but it looked larger. It appeared to be more dramatic. And I get it. It's clicks. I get it. It's news. It helps to tell the story, but that's not why I'm there. But safety first, absolutely, for myself and for the individuals around me.
How do you feel when you see photographs of yours on exhibit of moments of conflict on the streets that you benefit from?
I look at the benefit. I look at the benefit of being the individual responsible, the person that went out of his way to capture a moment in time. And if it was taken with a cell phone or in passing on the train, on a bus, car, on the highway, I just got a glimpse of it. Versus someone who is intentional. My responsibility, and this is what I loved about how I started, no one owns me. No one owns my images. No one owns my train of thought. So as a citizen of the United States of America, as a resident of North Carolina, no one can tell me what I can or can't do within the confines of the law. And my responsibility to tell the story was never a benefit because I didn't realize how I could quantify or monetize what was happening. It was just to document. That's why these images are just now seeing the light of day in 2 years. I've been shooting since 2008. The benefit just hit the block a couple of years ago. It's been a long time of just self-funding treks across the country and wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be a part of history, wanting to create a narrative outside of the mainstream media, wanting to stand up and give back what I could. I know I couldn't fund a movement. I couldn't do that. I wasn't necessarily an organizer. I wasn't a member of law enforcement. I wasn't a politician. I wasn't even a community leader at the time. But there was something that I could do and give back and provide to the movements, not just movement, to the movements. And that was with a camera. Benefiting from it, I think, makes sense now because when we look at images from civil rights history, we look at not just Gordon Parks, we not just Dawood Bey. I mean, there are people, there are men and women throughout history who have risked their lives to capture these amazing images, and they're no different from me. Some were on assignment. I wasn't. And I had asked that myself, like, why are you doing this? Someone asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm a photojournalist. They're like, well, have you ever been on assignment? I was like, no. I was like, well, let's just unpack that statement. Like, you've never been on assignment. I'm like, no one's ever sent you into the field. I'm like, no. They're like, well, you're a different type of individual then. I've never been paid to go into the field. It's never been like, oh, here's X amount of dollars. We're going to take care of this and take care of that. Go do this. Go create this narrative. That's never been done. I had a crowd fund once. I think I raised like $1,000 and I made that stretch damn near my whole life. That's been the only dollar I've received. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the integrity it takes to just do it because you feel you have to. So now when institutions and media outlets are paying attention, it's well earned. And it's over a period of time to where I couldn't work a regular 9-to-5 job because it took away from this passion. Having a great career somewhere, you just can't always up and move around when you want to. Being a teacher, for example, if there was a time you ever wanted to write and you just felt it, but you had to go to work in the morning, something had to give. I took that on the chin. There were extended periods of not having enough, but I created the work anyway. And I built the content with integrity anyway. I didn't do it. I didn't sell it because I needed the money. I haven't sold any images. The only work that you've seen that's even been displayed are in nonprofit institutions. There isn't anything in Newsweek. There isn't anything in On Time magazine or anything like that. And I was very intentional with that. I wanted to build the integrity first to see if I could really do this because I needed to do it, because I loved to do it. And then get paid for it later. That's what happens by all means. I've earned that right, but let me get the details together first in my heart. Let me be a man that can't be easily moved first, before the accolades, before the awards, before people start paying attention. Just do the work because you know it needs to be done first.
Alvin, there's a exhibit of photography on display at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture called Welcome to Brook Hill. What would a visitor see at that exhibit?
People. A visitor will see the faces of a community, of a village that has existed since 1951, and less of what they've heard from the mainstream media, less what they've heard from local media. They're going to feel a reflection of themselves. As soon as you walk in, you'll see Brook Hill Village established 1951, and you'll see quotes. You'll see a collage of about 4 images of demolition equipment and buildings being torn down. But that's it. The rest of the exhibition, you'll see families, you'll see individuals, and you'll see a population, and you'll see groups of people that are doing everything in their power to stay above water, to take care of themselves and their families the best way they know how. You'll see passion in people's eyes. You'll see purpose, and you'll see lifelines, being extended into one of the most marginalized communities in Charlotte, a community that in 1937 didn't exist, but there's been some historical context, right on that wall, right by the video, that shows that there was a slaughterhouse there, that shows there was a lack of lights, gas, water, that there was an incinerator there. Everything is in close proximity. That particular area of Charlotte was never meant to accomplish anything. It came into existence as a D-grade community, while the community of Myers Park was an A-grade community, which is interesting because the narrative is often, well, why did those people tear down where they lived? They're getting what they deserve. When if you've done even just a little bit of research, understand that it's always been that way. It came into existence as less than. Brook Hill is a village where the rent is around $700. And across the street, it's about $1,500. It's about 200 families that are still calling Brook Hill home, mostly African Americans, Black folks, people who are doing everything in their power to make it. It's interesting that it's existed for this long in this condition because the land is owned by one company and the buildings are owned by another company. So the residents are caught between a rock and a hard place, literally. There's not a lot you can do with what you don't own to the best of your ability. It's not a place where you live if you're wealthy. It's not a place where you live if you have amazing credit. It's not a place where you live if you have graduate degrees and PhDs. It's a place you live where you're trying to make it. You're trying to take care of the people you love and yourself with what you have. And for it not to be protected is a problem. For it to be preyed upon is a problem. Because often the most marginalized and disenfranchised individuals of our communities are often the ones at the end of all the drama. More things happen to people that don't have, that aren't asked how they feel, aren't asked how they would like to vote, or asked what they would like to have or like to see, than people who have more than enough means. There's a school, a great school, Sedgefield, that isn't far from there, that is about to be absorbed by Dilworth. And that means those children that live in Brook Hill are going to have to go someplace else, even though they've been going there since they knew what school was. Poverty is violence, and it always has been. It isn't just because you have less than. It isn't just because you aren't able to have. It's what's being done to you and your voice counting less. But Brook Hill is an amazing village, man. It is a community of some of the most beautiful people that live here. Everyone does everything in their power, man, to be great. Beautiful children, grandmothers, grandfathers, aunties, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, people that are really just trying to make it. And they should be able to make it. They absolutely should be able to make it. But it's a community that's existed, man, relatively nonstop, since 1951.
Alvin, the photographs are uplifting and affirming to change the narrative. Is there a danger in seeing those photographs or reading the texts that accompanies the photographs and thinking, no need to change the conditions or to invest in the neighborhood, just respect the dignity of those families and leave them be? Should that be the response?
If that's what the residents want. And that's what was really important about the partnership with the Gantt. We asked, and we continuously ask, what do you want? What do you need? What would you like to be represented? Too often, individuals of privilege can parachute into a community and tell them what they need. And that's why every interview I've done concerning Brook Hill specifically and exclusively has been done in Brook Hill, because it's a perspective. I want you to see and feel what this is. It's not a spectacle. Look and feel and find out what's needed, what's required, and what you can give or what you can have access to. That's important because, again, people often think with privilege, they have the answers, and maybe they're doing the exact opposite of what's necessary and what's needed. You know, people wanted to be left alone. They could absolutely be left alone, but there has to be a standard. You know, you cannot live in an environment where you're paying rent, right? And there's mold and there's mildew and there's insects and there's infestations. That's not going to fly. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you have. That's not acceptable. Not in this country, not in this city. And those are the conditions. And it's out of their control. If you have an infestation of insects and bleach doesn't take care of that, cleaning Pine Sol and things like that doesn't take care of that, you need some help. And if you can't afford it, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with bed bugs? You know, what are you going to do with mice? You know, what are you going to do with rats? What are you going to do when mold is growing at an uncontrollable pace because the way the humidity is regulated? You know, bleach doesn't take care of that.
From the developer's point of view, the properties are so dilapidated that the only recourse to provide secure and safe housing is to take the ones down and to redevelop.
We've been dealing with the affordable housing crisis for years here. If approximately 66 odd families move here every single day, Brook Hill is one of the last remaining naturally occurring affordable housing communities in Charlotte. Why aren't we directing resources there? If what we need is affordable housing, there's approximately 62 acres there. 62 acres that could be used to benefit a multitude of families. There are developers, there are business partners, there are financiers and individuals who are well-versed in these processes, well more than you and I. Something has to be done, not just for the people who live there, but for the people who are going to come after them. There's land that is sitting there that is being underutilized. And the people who live there now are being forced to live in substandard conditions without their consent. That's the issue. If you want to live someplace that's not up to par, quote unquote, and that's where you want to be and that's what you want to do, that's on you. But I believe that the city and developers and housing authorities and individuals that understand what's going on with the power have a duty to the people who live there to do better by them, whether they're benefiting directly from it or not. You wouldn't want to live someplace with your family that was less than a governmental standard, regardless of your level of income. That's not fair. That's not safe. You wouldn't want to work someplace like that. The people in Charlotte now know what's happening. There have been entire communities that have been razed, that have been destroyed, that are no longer around. Brooklyn, for example, where the Gantt sits, you know, that community's gone. Cherry, right around the corner, kind of where I used to live in Myers Park, it's all but gone. This community where we're sitting right now doesn't look like it used to look 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. We've got to be held accountable for that. And I think the more that we show the human side, the less we're concentrating on the buildings, the less we're concentrating on the return on investment, and just start doing right by people.
Alvin, you grew up in Rockford, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
What was Rockford like for you as a child?
Growing up, absolutely amazing. We had all the seasons, family. My whole family's there, mom and dad's side. I went to the school my parents went to. And growing up in a community, in a house, in a ranch-style home in a neighborhood where there was upper-middle-class black folks and there was white people across the street, there were the Italians and Jewish people around the corner. And it was just a community that was great. Everyone's parents had great jobs, not necessarily the highest educated sector of the population, but everyone could take care of themselves and then some. My mom back then, this was in the 80s. I mean, she might have been making $15 an hour. I don't know what that would equate to today, but she didn't have a college degree. Stepfather at the time had 2 jobs. You know, he was making that plus some. So I only had a brother and a sister. You know, we owned a home, always had cars. Hell, we might have been rich for all I knew. We could have been dead poor. I don't know. You know, parents are really good at masking children's insecurities, you know, and I really appreciated that. But we were given opportunity. It was a city that we thought was growing. And then the industry started closing. And it was one of the manufacturing hubs of America. it was like a metalworking city, unions and things like that, and everything just started to close. And so people started losing their jobs and their homes, and the quality of life just spiraled, and it's still spiraling. It's one of the most dangerous cities in America now. It's literally, if it's not number one, it's number two of the highest level of unemployment among black men ages 17 to 24. I think it's like 79% right now. Number two in racial disparity. I think it's number three or number four, number five, most dangerous, most violent, just all those bad things in a city that's 90 miles north of Chicago. Crony capitalism, politics, it's just a mess. School district, it's a mess. Infrastructure crumbling, it's just a mess. There's money just going everywhere where it needs to go. And it's a city that was once amazing. It was a city that reminded a lot of people of Detroit, reminded a lot of people of Flint, cities that were just really strong commerce, manufacturing cities. And the bottom just fell out. But growing up, man, we had everything, man. It's a city that's built on a river. Beautiful. It's called the Forest City. We have one of the highest rated park systems in the country. Gorgeous city, man. Access to everything. You can get to Chicago in an hour and a half. Milwaukee in an hour and a half. There's cities there. There's work to be done there. Living there just pulled so much out of so many people. I remember when I was in high school, there was something called the People Who Care lawsuit. And it was basically parents and, some other individuals got through. I was like, you know what? We don't like how this school district structure zoning thing is set up. And they sued the city for like years. We're talking millions of dollars. And schools were closed and rules were changed and people were pulled out of schools to go to other schools. And it was just a mess for a long time. And the city really never recovered.
What did growing up in Rockford teach you?
That I had to work for everything. Nothing was going to be given to me. I watched my mom and my dad and my aunts and uncles and everyone who I love work hard. Hard. There was nothing that was promised either. There was no such thing as a silver spoon with anyone I knew, actually, personally. It was a city with harsh winters, man, to where you had to be prepared. I remember having friends whose power was cut off, gas was cut off, lights were cut off, kids coming to school, looking less than presentable. But it taught me that I could make it. But it made me kind of cynical. I was raised with all the tools. My parents gave me everything I needed, but everyone else would impart in you that you weren't good enough. If you weren't white and already rich, this is where you're going to be for the rest of your life. I grew up with that chip on my shoulder. I had to prove everyone that I was different. I had to prove everyone that I was better. So I studied harder. I read more. I became more worldly in theory, because I wanted to have conversations with people who I thought were better than me. This was as a child. As a child, I learned how to ski. As a child, I learned how to skateboard. I learned how to ride bikes, freestyle, all the things that the quote-unquote white boys did. I wanted to have access beyond the world that I was given. That taught me a lot, not just about white consumption and acceptance and things like that, but a lot about myself, that I was limitless. You speak so well. Well, I'm kind of supposed to. And it necessarily wasn't from an educational standpoint. It was just from learning. I wanted to know what was out there. And my parents gave me autonomy to do so. Having some of the best teachers in my life, I had some amazing teachers. They're like, you can do it. You are who you know you are. And we're going to give you the tools to make that happen. There was a teacher of mine, I was in the third grade. I haven't seen this young lady in 25 years, 30 years, maybe. And I must have been up at the school. And I've been to the school since I left, right? And she was like, Alvin, I'm a grown man. I don't look anything like I looked when I was in the third grade. And she recognized me. And that was one of my favorite teachers. I look nothing. What was I? 2 feet tall, 3 feet tall, something like that. I look nothing like that. But just to be recognized, and the community has been amazing. It actually has. It just can't do better. Possibly wants to do better. But what hurts, and this is something that I'll probably carry with me for a while. Anytime an individual raises an issue, whether it's social justice or socioeconomics or whatever, they always ask, well, what are you doing for Rockford? They don't address the issue. They want to know what you're doing. You're just as powerless as they are for a city. They're not asking the mayor. They're not asking city council. They're not asking local government. They're not asking community leaders and philanthropists and people like that. They're asking you, a regular citizen that makes $8, $9, $10 an hour. What are you doing for the city? And there's nothing that you can say that's going to be good enough. That's the reoccurring theme in the city. And that's crushing. That's soul depressing. That will tear your insides out. Because it's like, dude, I can't live like this where everything is being deflected by what are you as the individual doing. Instead of, we got to do something about this together. We have to make this community better, not only for ourselves, but for the people coming after us. So growing up with that maybe never want to actually live there as an adult. It maybe not want to be there and be successful because I saw what would happen once you got access. It still wasn't comfortable. Just because you lived on another side of town didn't change your experience. It masked it. It made you hide it a little better. But the reality was you're still in prison. I had to get the hell out of prison, man.
You are Alvin Jacobs Jr. Who is Alvin Jacobs Sr.?
Well, Alvin Collins Jacobs Jr. is me. Alvin Collins Jacobs Sr. is my father. He was born in Arkansas, Camden, Arkansas, actually, and moved to Rockford, Illinois. We look a lot alike, about the same height, same build. When I was up there a few months ago, he gave me his old motorcycle jacket. I'm a biker. He's been a biker his whole life. He's a guy who I always wanted to make proud. That's why I really started putting my name on everything. It became not AJ, it's Alvin. It's specifically Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. I wanted to not just brand that, but make it worth something. I have a son who's Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. III. Hopefully to continue that legacy, I want to be great. I didn't have a choice in my name, but I had choice in his name, and hopefully he'll have, or one of them have choices, in their name. He's a guy who divorced my mom when I was 3. I've got a brother, I've got a sister, and he had another son. He's a guy who I love, who I respect. He's a person that never forgets anything. He can tell stories from the 60s like no one's business. He always worked, always had a house, always had a nice car, always had a bike, dressed pretty cool. Him being older, he's like 75, 76 now. Of course, there's a disconnect. Back then, men were different. They were harder. They weren't as personable, maybe. Maybe that was just my dad. He's a guy who I'm proud of because he never gave up. I wanted him to be more like me, if that makes any sense. And by that, I mean the ability to communicate, without the shell. We didn't get along for a while. We weren't fighting. We weren't beefing or anything like that. We just didn't talk. It could go years. He was up there, I was down here or someplace else. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago, maybe been 3 years ago, I was in Rockford visiting and I saw him and my uncle, which was his sister's husband. And I just pulled over, started talking to him. He said, I want to tell you something. I'm like, what? He's like, I'm proud of you. Words I wanted to hear my whole life, right? And I just let all of that go. All of that. That's all I needed to hear, And for him to do that right then, man, I forgot everything. I don't remember a damn thing he ever did wrong. So for him to do that, everything's been absolved. We're good. And we're closer now than we've ever been. But for years, I felt like I wasn't good enough through that relationship. It's like, what's wrong with me? There was an episode on The Fresh Prince, where Will was asking Uncle Phil, what's wrong with me? Like, why don't my dad want me? And it wasn't necessarily that. The communication was off. Thought he wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't being harmful, but, when you're not being helpful, my mom never said anything bad about him. She never had not one word to say negatively about him or the relationship. Everything I learned firsthand. But he's just a person that I forgive, that I love, I respect, I honor. I share a lot of his traits. We look alike. I love cars because of him. I love motorcycles because of him. I'm a little arrogant because of him, proud because of him, talk a little shit because of him. That's kind of, where it came from. I just wanted to be better than.
And your stepdad?
Stepdad was a guy that I can't remember when they got married, but he took care of us. When my mom and dad divorced, my mom moved to California. I think that's where my youngest brother was born. She came back and, met him, and we never looked back. The life we lived growing up was partially due to them together. It was a guy who worked hard. They bought their first house together and just provided us an opportunity, man, to get out of, what was going to be not just stereotypical, but we were going to be a statistic, kind of, sort of. My mom never not worked hard, but single mom, 3 kids, 80s. That's tough. So it changed our circumstances. I seen him get up and go to work every day, 2 jobs, just hold the family down for a long time till, they got divorced. But he was a guy who really looked out, who didn't have to, who could have just been like, look, I don't know what to tell you. Instead, he contributed, to the family. He made our lives better. We didn't get along that well because I was hurting because my parents weren't together. My mom and my dad weren't together, my biological father. So I didn't give him the respect that he deserved. So you can only have a couple men in the house. Something's got to give. We had clashes. But later I understood where I went wrong. Dude, what is wrong with you? How dare you? But just a person that really did all he could to make sure we had what we needed. I mean, we had some of the most amazing Christmases anywhere. Seriously, like there was nothing that I wanted that I couldn't have. The only thing we really didn't have access to was time because they worked so much. So there were no Boy Scouts, there was no baseball, no basketball, things like that because we didn't have a way to get there because they worked so hard. But we had everything else that we needed and we were safe.
What comes to mind when you think of your mom?
The most amazing woman I've ever met in my life. Like, not even just because she's my mom, but there was like no fault. She might have been too nice. That's it. A pastor, just a woman of God who sacrificed everything for her children and her friends. Like, she would give you her last, and if you still needed more, she'd go get something else and give that to you too. Unapologetically loving. I never heard her curse, never seen her drink, never smoked. The only men I seen around were her husbands. Like, that's it. And that isn't making her into a saint, you know what I mean, because of, you know, what I saw her do or what I didn't see her do, but she walked the walk and talked the talk. She took care of her babies. You know, she did what she had to do to make sure that we had everything we needed. And she didn't have the best life in return from that. Her life could have been exponentially better if she chose another path, but maybe we wouldn't have been taken care of as good. She wasn't as happy as she could have been, you know, because she poured into everyone else. And that hurts. It hurts to see someone who just loved God like I've never seen anyone love God and didn't receive that love from people in return. She's in heaven. If there's heaven, if she's not there, this whole thing's a bad joke.
She passed on?
2 years ago. And cancer that she didn't have to die from. It was a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was like 97% curable or something like that. But she prayed and used homeopathic remedies instead of going to the doctor. She was going to pray it away. Don't speak death. Don't do that. Just pray, just pray, just pray. And she lost, 100 pounds, easy. You know, I just seen her get weaker and weaker and weaker. And she was in California, flew out there and stayed, for a little while. And this was right before No Justice, No Peace opened. So she was getting to see and hear about some of it, but didn't get to actually see my life change, or everything that I was working for or working so hard to accomplish come to fruition. But one of the most amazing women, you would have loved. Everyone loved her. She was always quoting scriptures. And she traveled. I don't know how she traveled the way she did. I thought she was Jewish. I swear to God. She's been to Israel so many times. Photos from back in the day. She just really went everywhere she wanted to go and did everything she wanted to do. So she lived a good life later on. But most of that life was spent sacrificing for her children.
Alvin, you went to an elite, mostly white, private school growing up, Keith Country Day. What do you remember about Keith?
Wishing I was white. We lived in the hood in the 3rd and 4th grade. This was before we moved to our house on the northwest side. And living in the hood, every day you wish you were somewhere else. You wish you were someone else. So we're pulling up, in school. My stepdad had like a 70 Challenger. Beautiful. Dukes of Hazzard is all I can remember. But these kids, parents would pull up in Porsches, Jags, Mercedes, Benzes, like all the nice cars, right? And we just didn't have that. We didn't have access to that. So I'm like, dude, what is going on here? I didn't know we were this poor. But the reality of wanting to escape my reality became real. But I remember having good friends there. Some of the most prominent families in the city, were friends of mine. Because if you had money, that's the school you went to. It showed me that there were differences in culture. There were differences in what money could do and just what being smart allowed. My grades were great. I was learning everything I was supposed to learn. But there was a gap. No one ever came to our house. We'd spend the night over other people's houses, but where were they going to sleep? And I was kind of embarrassed where we lived anyway. It was, in an apartment, West Side, until we moved, into our home. Then I was like, okay, everybody can come over. It was just a period of adjustment. There wasn't any way that I could have been prepared for, okay, this is what it's going to be like when you go to this white school. My parents thought that they were doing everything right by us, by allowing us this opportunity, but we weren't prepared for it. All of my friends in the neighborhood were black and poor, and that was okay. But then when you're going to school with rich white people, if I wasn't so smart, it would have been a problem. If I wasn't so opinionated and outspoken and creative, it would have been a problem. I would have felt less than the rest of my life. But I learned about heavy metal. I learned about skateboarding. I learned about snowboarding. I learned about skiing and, all the things that people do, that aren't necessarily poor. Star Wars. I was always Lando Calrissian. I don't know what the hell that was about. But it was a vibe. It was a vibe. And, a lot of those kids I'm still friends with to this day. definitely, the teachers. But they didn't treat me different, honestly. As poor as we were, in hindsight, they didn't treat me different. It wasn't like, okay, here's, the poor black kid. I mean, I didn't look, we weren't destitute, but we clearly didn't live in mansions. Some of these kids did. Some of these kids were, parents were, leaders, in the community before, the economic collapse. Some of these kids had real money, but they never treated us any differently. And I appreciate that to this day.
You went to a public high school, Auburn High School.
I did.
How would your friends have described you in high school?
Then, man, so check it. Remember I was saying about how the school districts and everything were changing and everything just got weird? So I went to a middle school on the other side of town. And then I had to go to a high school on the other side of town. So the high school I was supposed to go to was Guilford, which was 10 minutes down the street from Eisenhower Middle School. But I ended up going to Auburn, which was literally across the bridge, across the tracks, across the bridge, complete side of town, which was close to my house, though. I didn't know anything about Auburn, even though it was only a couple of miles from my house. Just the way the districts and everything were messed up, you could have went to school in Ireland. No one would have second guessed it. It took me a couple of years to get my groove. I was still coming from polo shirts with, the collar up, Bass Wrangley shoes, Guess jeans, that whole Coca-Cola, Benetton, Genera, Swatch watch look to Auburn on the west side. It's like, yo, like, whose man's is this? My vibe was off. And I had family and friends at Auburn. I had 3, 4, 5 cousins that went there. I was good. I was okay. I was accepted into the culture. I was, the little cousin. But it took a while. Active in the school, not necessarily in programs and things like that, but I was everywhere at one time. We had singing groups and I was cool. Not the coolest, but I was cool. It wasn't a problem. It was weird for a while. But once I got that groove, got a girlfriend and got my set of friends, and it became all right. But I think they would say that he was very opinionated, very outspoken. He said what he wanted to say, but conflicted. It's different when you don't know who you are and you're looking for social cues to form that narrative about yourself. That's hard. You can't really talk to your parents because the age gap, they don't really know what you're going through. You can't really explain that to them. My oldest son I had when I had just graduated. So my oldest son is 26. So I was 18. He was born in 93. So I was kind of graduated in 92. I was a grown man, as a little kid. So my responsibilities were different. But Auburn taught me a lot as well, not just about community, but what it looks like to work hard. You can have anything you want. We had this program called the Kappa program and, the Academy program, 2 of the most highly rated, programs in the city. The highest GPA is at Auburn. Private schools, everything, can't touch it. But everyone's afraid to go there because it's quote unquote in the hood. Even though the hood was roughly 2-3 miles, from my house. I walked to school before. I didn't have to, but, I did. But what they would say was that who I am now is no surprise. I think that I was leading up to this. I wasn't the most hood dude. I wasn't the most cool dude. I wasn't the most nerdy dude. There was no extreme. It was just kind of right in the middle of this guy's going to get in here and get out. I couldn't wait to get out of Rockford. I moved to Atlanta almost the day after I got out of there. I couldn't wait to leave. And that's what really changed my life. The people I went to school with were still friends today. That school taught me a lot about life.
You mentioned becoming a father as a young man. How did becoming a father at the age of 18, 19 change the trajectory of your life?
Oh, man. I was in college full time, man. Had a job full time. I was going to grow up and be an electronic engineer. Everything was already figured out. But the responsibility of being a dad changed it. My son's grandfather, I'll never forget this. I knocked on the door one day. He might have been 2 months, 3 months old. Knock on the door. Hey, Mr. Alexander, I'm here to see Isaiah. He opens the door. Doesn't open it all the way. There's a screen door. He's like, well, you don't have anything in your hand. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, your son eats. Your son uses the bathroom. Your son wears clothes. You are responsible for those things. And I kind of paused for a moment and it clicked and I got it. And I learned that day. Responsibilities, man. Like he said it just like that. And I got it. And it changed because I wasn't able to just go to school, okay, I'll see you in 4 years. I'm going to be successful and I'll come back for you. I'm going to take care of us, and now I was like, today, you are responsible today. And I never forgot that. It changed the trajectory of what needed to be done right then. Like I didn't really have, the adolescence after high school. I didn't really get a chance to just do all the things because I was a whole father. I was a whole dad. And I didn't want to be in Rockford at all. But, we didn't end up together. So I wasn't like, okay, let's move to this city. Like, well, you can go wherever you want. I'm staying here. So kind of switched my life up a bit.
What course did your life take after you graduated high school?
The Spaghetti Junction. If you can imagine an interstate full of exits and off-ramps and a few turnpikes, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how I was going to exist. I knew that I was bound for greatness. I knew that there was work that needed to be done. I just didn't know what road to take. I was angry, frustrated. I felt that I let myself down. I didn't have a direct focus or purpose. Getting a job, okay, cool. Taking care of family, okay, cool. But I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't getting out of life, what I felt I deserved. And regular living didn't appeal to me. It just did not. I knew that I wasn't going to, through normal circumstances, have the ability to own a beautiful home, to drive a nice car, and to be held in the highest regard and, esteem, of my peers. I needed to do something different. And I wasn't smart enough. College wasn't going to do it for me. A good job wasn't going to hire me. I didn't have the skills. I'm like, man, I got to do something different. Like, I'm not happy at all. I don't know if I can rap or sing or something. I'm not really that athletically inclined. But the streets were like, yo, like, what's up? And with that, growing up in the 90s in the Midwest and that close up of proximity to Chicago, money is universal. Wealth and resources are universal. The guy with the most money always wins. I don't care. No one cares where it comes from. It's just as long as you got it. And that life of power, I looked at money that way. I didn't look at money as a resource. I looked at it as power. I looked at it as something that could upgrade not only the quality of my life, my standard of living, but my class. No one cared where you came from as long as you came with it. And it's like, man, how can I get a nice car? How can I nice clothes and eat some better food and jewelry and what have you? But you can't live that way for long. There's no possible way that you can continue to do the wrong things with the right mind and not be held accountable. And then the people you're around change. You're around less wholesome individuals. Your friends aren't upstanding members of society, and things that would have normally never flew are now societal norms. I think my graduating class, everybody's going to jail. Everybody. Like, there are guys who are still in jail today, who are 44 years old, who are still in jail from the 90s. You wake up one day, you're like, okay, this isn't going to work. This is not going to work for me. I have to do something different today or I'm going to lose my life, whether my freedom or my actual existence on this earth.
What were you doing?
Everything. The only thing I didn't do was work a damn job. I did everything but that. I did everything but clock in somewhere for a period of years. And I've lived in Florida. I've lived in the cities where being rich was the only thing that mattered. You're around guys in Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Porsches and Bentleys and whatever. That's not like Rockford. Like, dude, that's a $300,000 car. I don't understand. That's a $50,000 watch. I don't understand. You have tattoos and a tank top on, like, and you're like 5'2". You don't play for anybody. I teach me your ways. It just really evolved into what made sense culturally. You either get money or you die. You get caught up into that so quickly. Being poor is like the worst possible thing that can happen to you. It's like, dude, I'd rather just not be here than not have, once you get the taste of that life. But I got it back on track soon enough. I'm still here. I'm not doing life in prison. But there was a lot of mistakes that were made and that could have been made that could have cost me my life. I'm an advocate now for doing everything you can do today. If I hadn't been through what I've been through, I probably would be lazy. I probably would think the world owed me. I probably would be blaming the quote unquote white man, for what I don't have. So a lot of that passion comes from, I'm in a hurry. I'm not in a hurry to capture images as a photographer, but I'm in a hurry to live. I've wasted years. The only way to get someplace faster is to run faster, to run harder, to run longer. You can't get tired. You got to have, some sort of stamina. You got to have a plan. So it taught me that, and I'm glad I went through all that stuff early, so now I'm not still making mistakes as a middle-aged man. There's things that you can do when you're younger. It's like, there's a mistake, or, chalk it up to youth or whatever, but be a grown man out here messing up. Not a lot of leeway for catastrophic mistakes in your life, so I'm glad I went through what I needed to go through early enough to where I could kind of, get back on course and start doing the right thing.
At the Gantt Museum, there's an exhibit called Question Bridge.
Yes.
In which black men discuss the depiction of black men in popular culture. One of the men recorded in the exhibit says that one challenge facing black men is the standard of authenticity is street cred, that maintaining street cred is all important. He calls it the ghettoization of success, that it is a self-imposed standard that keeps black men down and from becoming doctors and lawyers and professors and corporate executives, that young black men need to stop worrying about losing their street cred and start evolving and joining society. What do you make of that?
Those are instructions. And that's all I cared about for a while, culturally. And what we see on TV and what we hear in music is all about perception. It's about how bad you are, how strong you are, how powerful you are, how you don't take no mess, how much of a man you are, how you're about that life. And it's destroying us. There's a brother that told me something about 15 years ago. He said, Alvin, you know what? Right now, this very second, there's a few 100,000 black men sitting on the edge of a bunk right now, wishing they just would have let it go. Everything that they thought was important right then and there doesn't even matter anymore. And we're chasing something that's not even attainable. A lot of what's going on, from violence to drugs and everything else, has everything to do with a perceived perception of how we're supposed to handle things instead of just going about your business. And things affect us culturally differently, right? If I bump into you on the street, it's a different reaction than someone that looks like me bumping into me and there's other people around depending on the neighborhood. It's just different. And I have to handle it differently or there's a problem. We don't take that into account. It's just normalcy. Many of us grew up with violence. Many of us grew up with violence in our household and drugs and gambling and parents that aren't active. And it's just a different life, gunshots and just all of these things, man, that you're hearing that are normal. Then you grow up and you're supposed to act like it didn't happen. You still have to go to school and perform. In addition to everything else is happening. And you're 13, 14, 15 years old. You don't have any power. You're just subjected to your environment. And then you grow up as a grown man and you're still carrying that chip of frustration and anger. And you don't even know how to deal with people, man. You've got no social skills, no soft skills. You're just out here. Don't take a drink. Don't take a tow. Don't do a line. Don't shoot up. I mean, add that to the problems you've already barely dealing with. Don't be a father or a mother or a felon or anything like that. Dude, your life's done and you're still expected to function. There's a couple of people I know in Question Bridge. Like, I know them personally. I know them. Like, we're friends. And I had no idea that they were in it. I was watching. I'm like, yo, I know him. Like, literally. That's my boy right there. Like, I know him. Like, we're from the same place. Like, yeah, how did he get in here? That's a real program. That's a real exhibition. There's people in there who are living real lives, and everything they're saying is true. But it's important that you understand where some of us are coming from. As an educator, you deal with, young men and, young women every day that just come from different backgrounds. And if you don't handle them the right way, it's going to be a problem. And sometimes we have to drop that ego. Sometimes we have to, make ourselves a little bit smaller just to where they're okay. We don't lose anything. You don't lose anything, man. You're good. I have to do that sometimes. I'm an OG at 44, soon to be 45, and I have to carry myself that way. That's a responsibility. It isn't just a street designation. It's, you're older. You're not my uncle, or my father, but I look to you, for guidance, for support. And growing up, a lot of the OGs that would be in their 60s now, were taken from the streets. So there was an entire culture and an entire infrastructure on the streets that just ripped away. So we grew up just trying to figure out the best way we knew how. And that's a problem. Dad's gone, grandfather's gone, uncle's gone, cousins, brothers gone. So you're just trying to navigate life and its harshness on your own. It's a problem. That's true. That's exactly true. We grow up differently and we have to figure it out regardless. And it's problematic.
Alvin, when you look back one day, what do you want your career to have been about?
A voice. I want everyone who I came into contact with to have a resounding responsibility of he did what he could with what he had. I want my career to be about exposure and truth and responsibility and redemption. You know, I've come from a rough place, man. Not the worst hood, but I've been through some things. And I took it upon myself to do the best with what I had. I could have gave up. I could have done something completely different, but I took the responsibility to capture freedom or lack thereof. And I want to stand in the halls, you know, of social justice and civil rights and, you know, activists, you know, of our time and before and beyond as an independent, powerful member of that narrative. I want to go down in history as one of the ones who stood up, who did what he could with what he had, consistently showed up, who had time and space, but also a critical analysis to answer the hard questions and, you know, to do some of the research to come up with answers, not just reactionary. You know, how can we make this better next time? How can we prevent this from happening now? Real stories, not just, hey, there's somebody selling drugs. Yeah, but why? You know, there's someone, you know, painting on a building. You know, there's someone holding a protest sign. Yeah, but why? Let's dig a little bit deeper. Anybody can do that. What's underlying? What's really going on? I want to be known for that.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. is a photojournalist and image activist. His social documentary work has been featured at the Levine Museum of the New South and the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture. And now, a personal word. I met Alvin Jacobs at a consciousness party. Michael and Laura Duvall invited friends of theirs to their home for food, wine, and conversation. In their invitation, Michael and Laura said, with so much going on in the world, we need to spend time with, quote, conscious people to help create a more civil society. My wife and I showed up, not sure how politically or culturally conscious we were, but thrilled to make new friends in Michael and Laura's home. My wife and I were talking with other guests at the kitchen table when Alvin pulled up a chair. He soon commanded the conversation, talking about exotic cars and motorcycles, expensive watches, and the investment value of Air Jordan sneakers. He talked about wealth and poverty. He talked about the racial divide in America. He talked about white privilege and white power and the oppression of black communities. We asked questions, he answered. Alvin reminded me of Michael Eric Dyson. Dyson is a professor of sociology at Georgetown University, a New York Times contributing opinion writer, and a contributing editor of The New Republic. Dyson speaks and writes passionately about the black experience in America. He addresses history, politics, sports, and culture, noting how black Americans continue to suffer from generations of racial oppression. Dyson is a brilliant polemicist. He is an academic with a street edge. He comes at you fast and hard, pivoting quickly, commanding language, making provocative points with authority and conviction. I listened to Alvin thinking he could give Dyson a run for his money. I called Alvin a few days after the party and asked him if he would be a guest of the podcast. He agreed. This time we sat at my kitchen table. Talking about life and meaning into a microphone is a different dynamic than meeting new folks at a party. Alvin spoke deliberately, more personally, more vulnerably. He spoke about documenting the struggles of our most marginalized neighbors. He spoke about the twists and turns of his life. He spoke about his camera as a weapon. This time, Alvin reminded me of Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks is among the most preeminent photojournalists and social documentarians of race and class in the 20th century in America. Born the last of 15 children on a farm in Kansas in 1912, Parks grew up in a segregated and racist community. He did not finish high school. He moved to Minnesota as a teenager. His first job was playing piano in a brothel. He took menial jobs from there: a busboy, a traveling waiter, a singer, a semi-pro basketball player, a porter on a railroad dining car. At times, he was homeless. He struggled to survive. But he kept trying new things. He wanted a better life. In 1937, When Gordon was 25 years old, he bought his first camera at a pawn shop in Seattle, a used Voigtlander Brilliant for $7.50. He took photographs of seagulls and fishermen along the Puget Sound. He returned by train to Minneapolis. When clerks at Eastman Kodak developed his very first roll of film, they were so impressed, they offered to exhibit his photographs. Gordon Parks found his calling. He borrowed equipment and asked for work. He soon took fashion photographs of models and everyday people on the street. His photographs garnered immediate praise for their honesty and composition. He gained a fellowship to take photographs for the Farm Security Administration in Washington, D.C., beginning a series on poverty in America. He sought to reveal the root of discrimination and bigotry. In 1942, Parks took an iconic photograph of a cleaning woman named Ella Watson holding a mop and broom in front of an American flag. The photograph was entitled American Gothic. Gordon Parks became the first black photographer hired by Vogue magazine. He created a signature style of taking photographs of models in motion. He became the first black photographer at Life magazine. For the next 30 years, his photojournalism documented poverty and crime, racial disparities, the civil rights movement, athletes and celebrities, and the cultural achievements and strength of Black America. He took photographs of Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and Stokely Carmichael. He composed music, published poetry, authored novels and autobiographies, co-founded Essence magazine, and wrote and directed films. His movie, The Learning Tree, was one of the first 25 films listed on the National Film Registry. He directed Shaft, about a black urban hero, and worked with Isaac Hayes on the score. All of which brings me back to Alvin C. Jacobs Jr. Alvin talks about lost moments and hard times, about finding his way, about the years of work he put in before his photographs were recognized. He was 34 years old when he began taking photographs of social movements and racial disparity. I went to see his exhibit at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture. Photographs Alvin took of people in the Brook Hill neighborhood of Charlotte. I saw photographs of men and women in their homes. I saw photographs of children playing. I saw photographs of folk making their way. The images are dignified, honest, affirming. It takes sensitivity and insight to take those pictures. It takes a lived experience. The images reveal an artist who has found his calling. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.